All right, welcome students. Here's my attempt to try to show you a little bit more of a project management problem, especially one that involves some crash costs. The one I'm going to take comes straight from the practice area. So if you came into week 5, ay, ay, ay. If you came into week 5 project management, instead of going into homework, if you came down to practice problems, you would find the one that I'm going to use here. It's the third problem in, as there are only 3 practice problems. First thing I would do anytime I have these, especially the ones involving crash cost, let's go ahead and copy this portion and we're going to put it into our Excel spreadsheet. By putting this table out here, there's a few things that I'm going to do first. Normally I say we map this thing out first, but in actuality, when crash costs are involved, I like to calculate 2 things. First thing I like to calculate is weeks available to crash. And I don't know why that didn't show up, so let's give it some ink. The other thing I like to figure out is my crash cost per week. These are my 2 items that I can calculate over here. Weeks available to crash is simply going to be my normal time minus my crash time. So that tells you how many weeks you can actually crash. My crash cost per week is going to equal, in parentheses, my crash cost minus my normal cost. That gives me my total crash cost, but since I'm having multiple weeks in some cases, I have to divide this by my weeks available to crash. By doing that, I can see that out of all these crash activities, my lowest cost one per week is activity B, then activity E, and so on and so on. That still doesn't tell me which one to crash first because I need to know what my critical path is. So at this point, I should map this thing out on paper. Remember, when I map it out, I'm using the normal times along with, normal times along with the predecessors. I'm going to try to actually do this in front of you using some PowerPoint magic. Let's see if this works. All right, first I have my first 2 items, A and B, that don't have predecessors. Looks like A is a burst activity out to C and D. B is a normal activity leading to E. C and G merge back into G, and E goes to F. If we stopped our mapping at this point, it looks like we have 2 open-ended finishes. So to make it easier for me, I give it a dummy finish here at the end. And that dummy finish, of course, has a 0-day duration. Now I'm ready to start. Well, I'm not quite ready for my forward pass. First, I have to put in the times. Here's the duration of each of these activities. Make sure you use the normal time for your first mapping through. Do not use the crash time, because never do we crash every single activity, only the ones that make sense. Now that I have my drawing, my map, now that I have my durations in, I can do my forward pass. 0 plus 3 equals 3, and so on and so on. A forward pass leads me up to a finish time of 17. You'll notice that 17 was when G is done. F is done at day 14. Yet 17 is what I'm going to use for my backward pass as well. That gives me slack time on BEF, that path. But I can see that my ACG has no slack time. In fact, I would go ahead and write my slack times in here. My zeros everywhere there's zeros. I got a little bit of slack time on activity D, and I've got 3 weeks of slack time on B, E, and F. So each of those are going to be areas where I don't pay much attention when it comes time to crash. Critical path is ACG. If I want to speed this project up or crash it, I'm going to concentrate first on the lowest cost activity on that critical path. So let's take this picture and jack into our Excel spreadsheet. Find that. Where did it go? Why does it look like my camera switched screens? Okay, there we go. In fact, I've got that picture hiding down here. I'm going to go ahead and pull it up a little closer, maybe. And I'm going to keep this up here as my reference point, just so I can keep an eye on what's going on. First question that I have in this homework assignment is, what is my critical path? My critical path, of course, is the ones without any slack time, so A, C, and G. Next, it asks me, if I were to try to crash a week, which activity would I crash first? Following the two rules of thumb, I'm going to crash the lowest cost item on my critical path. If I come up here, I can see that my critical path is A, C, and G. So I'm going to highlight those just for fun. On A, C, and G, my costs are $500 a week, $200 a week, or $87.50 a week. $87.50 is my lowest cost, so I'm going to crash activity G first. It asks me what my weekly cost to crash that activity is, and of course, it's just $87.50. Finally, it's going to ask me what's the cost to crash from week 17 to 14, or in other words, to crash 3 weeks out of here. Well, this one's kind of simple because it doesn't get us down to multiple paths, but let's do it anyway. If I'm going to crash 3 weeks, I can kind of ignore this whole BEF path because I know that BEF has a slack time of 3 weeks, so I'm not going to interfere with that. Instead, let's start with our ACG. So my first week of crash. Let's crash activity G because that's my cheapest one. To get my second week of crash, let's crash G again. My third week, I can't crash G anymore because if you look up here, I only have 2 weeks available to crash. So now I have to move up on my activity level and see. Should I crash A or should I crash C? Well, C is cheaper than A, so I'm going to crash C. That's the 3-week improvement I would need. So I'm going to do G, I'm going to do G, and I'm going to do C. So my total cost to crash those 3 weeks would just be summing up those items. 375. Now I would go back and I would plug these in and I would be good to go. I'm going to see if I can find a better one because what I really wanted was one that crashed multiple weeks down into multiple paths. You can see here, if we would have crashed activity C first by 2 weeks, then A, C, and G would have become the same as A, D, and G. But perhaps I'm just rambling at that point. Let's see how this video looks and if it helps.